still living from last week. That's all
Still good?
That's all I take a pinch and change the water on. Keep it on the water.
You know, if you want a piece of clothes to look, they're in the bag back there.
Oh, okay.
You can find it if you want to.
Well, I ain't gonna do that, but people bring flash to work, you know, different things, time. I didn't believe people at mom.
Oh, yeah.
She didn't believe it. And then when I was playing, they were dying early to live.
You got that touch.
And all these daffodils, I think I still have one that comes back every year. Even if it takes me forever to get it to it, it's putting me something.
Okay, let's open with a word of prayer. Lord, we thank you for this day, and we thank you for the chance to be together. We pray, Lord, that you would give us wisdom as we finish off this book. Help us to understand how these books work, why they spoke to thousands of generations and thousands of different cultures and peoples and communities and churches. We pray, Lord, that you would help us to be profitable for our faith, profitable for our hearts. Hear our prayer now in the name of Jesus. Amen. Okay. Like I said, we could possibly finish the entire book today. Chances are maybe need another week. But after this we're going to do the epistles of John in the New Testament. 3 short little books towards the end of the New Testament that actually have quite a bit in them. Quite a bit of stuff. So let's talk a little bit. Now that we're getting to the end of the book, let's maybe gain some perspective on how all this stuff works. So we've done a few Old Testament prophetic books. So just kind of generally speaking, what are some of your impressions of these big books like Ezekiel and Isaiah? What are these books about? How do they go? What's their main deal?
Well, if I was going to talk from my younger self, which is about 19 years old when I tried to read this book all the way through and it didn't work, to myself in Sunday school, I would say the question I had as a younger self was, did all these men get these visions from God?
Interesting.
The thing that I see now is, in order for different people to repeat the same thing, it must be coming from the same resource.
Okay. That's very interesting. So your younger self kind of had this...
Didn't believe that all these men, the vision came down. Although my mother is a vision person, but the same vision. My older self in Sunday school with you says that's possible and that looks right, because how can all these men write the same thing over and over and over and over?
Okay, so you've now got, your younger self had kind of questions.
A lot of questions. And now your older self, you've got some perspective.
Correct.
That's very interesting. Thank you for that. Anybody else have any thoughts? Here's a question for you. Why do you think these books have persisted?
Because our behavior is
There's something about our behavior, and you might see a pattern. Let me back it up again and just ask some easy evidential questions. Who were these books written to, and when, and why?
Meaning Ezekiel.
Ezekiel, well, there's easy, because see, now we know quite a bit, so we know some of the differences. Isaiah, to Judah before so here's this event that is catastrophic, and that is, it's actually, if you look on your study guides, if you look on your study guides, there's a little chronology. So 609, you have the death of Josiah. And if you remember, he was this reforming king, he was this good king. And again, so you've got up here in the north, in the Fertile Crescent, you've got Assyria and Babylon and their rivals. And before, Assyria had been the dominant empire, and it took out, so you had the two kingdoms, you had the northern and the southern kingdom, and Assyria takes out the northern kingdom. And then, but down here you've got Egypt, and the southern kingdom is worried about Assyria, and Babylon's starting to threaten Assyria. And so the southern kingdom, of course, the enemy of the enemy is my friend. So the southern kingdom has been cozying up to Babylon, but Egypt is now more worried about Babylon than Assyria because it sees Assyria's on the downside. So Egypt sends up an army in order to ally with Assyria and destroy Babylon. Well, Judah doesn't want to see Assyria beat Babylon, so Josiah goes out, fights the king of Egypt, and in a battle in the plains of Megiddo, Armageddon, that's where this stuff is connecting, and Josiah loses the battle and loses his life. But this brings Egyptian hegemony into this region. Okay? So, 609, Josiah dies in the battle against the Egyptians. 609 to 598 BC, the reign of Jehoiakim. 598 BC, reign of Jehoiakim, reigns 3 months, siege and fall of Jerusalem. Second deportation. There was a deportation, I think, I'm working on top of my head, I think it was about 605. That's usually the Daniel, assumed to be the Daniel deportation. Now 596, 7. That could be then the Ezekiel, I'm not sure, I don't know off the top of my head. But basically there's multiple deportations, and 586, you have the destruction of the temple. Now, we've done a lot of talking about, so Ezekiel is in Babylon, Daniel's in Babylon, Isaiah is before this, but one of the first things that the prophets say and what they're really known for, what the books are filled with, is God speaking to Israel and Judah because of what? God is angry and unhappy. Why?
Their unfaithfulness.
They're unfaithful to him. Well, what should they be doing? What's the framework of the story?
Worshiping God alone.
Okay.
They're mixing their worship of God with idol worship.
Right. Now, most of the time when we talk about this, most of the time when people talk about this, and they talk about idol worship, it's in reference to they're breaking a rule. And that's true. They're breaking the Ten Commandments. But the rules are within a much larger story of the world. So, again, this is the Genesis 1 representation. And you have the throne of God, and in a sense, the whole earth is temple, Genesis 1. Genesis 2, you have the focus on the Garden of Eden, which is in a sense the garden of the temple, of the palace. And the man and the woman are in the garden, and it's good, and it's functional, and it's a well-watered place. The book of Ezekiel sees the Garden of Eden as a mountain, which is interesting. And in a little bit, we're going to see why. Now, this is really hard for us to get our minds around. You know, Barbara, when you started telling your story about reading these books for the first time, when we come to these books with the questions we have in life. We come to these books with our culture. We come to these books with all of our stuff. Well, these books weren't written. John Walton likes to make a nice distinction. These books were written for us, but they weren't written to us. Which means that when we're reading them, we're overhearing ancient conversations that are being told, and they are within the context of ancient cultures, okay? And so if we really want to understand these books, it's really helpful to try to have an appreciation for the ancient cultures. So Genesis 2, Eden is a well-watered ground. Now, in geographical terms, we might say, well, Eden's kind of in the Fertile Crescent, okay, because you've got these rivers that are mentioned. But sometimes even Eden is depicted as a mountain. Well, I understand this now far better living in California than I ever did growing up in New Jersey. And since we have a water expert here, what's the relationships between mountains and water, Maury?
Well, here they're the source of roots.
Yeah. Why?
Better than snowpack.
Why are mountains so deeply associated with water?
You get more rain in the mountains than you do in the plain.
Okay, you get more rain in the mountains than you do in the plain. And we'll often realize this when in the winter it'll be cloudy and you'll turn on the news and the weather people will be saying,
It's gonna rain.
but it's snowing in the mountains and it's just kind of cloudy here. And, you know, scientists will tell you all the reasons why the mountains catch the water, why it's drier on the other side of the mountains, all this kind of thing. Okay. So Genesis 2 is the Garden of Eden, and it's a well-watered place, and the image is that this garden is ideal for human beings, and it's the delight of the Creator God who made all of this, and everything is wonderful. And then in Genesis 3, you have this catastrophe. What's the catastrophe?
Death.
Death comes in.
Flood.
Yeah.
Well, flood will come in chapter 6.
Yeah.
But the catastrophe is caused by
Rebellion against God.
rebellion against God. And God, unlike Nebuchadnezzar, doesn't just kill the gardeners. God, in a sense, retreats to his temple in the sky and leaves the earth, in a sense, says to Adam and Eve, you wanted to be in charge, okay, have at it. Now, he doesn't leave them completely. He gives them skins of animals to wear. But then so that's chapter 3. What happens in chapter 4 of the book of Genesis? The rebellion that seemed like kind of a small thing about breaking the rule about eating fruit, and that little small thing expressed a much bigger thing. Then in Genesis 4, bitter seeds bear bitter fruit. What happens in Genesis 4? The man and the woman have 2 boys. And if you would think about a family, this is about the biggest disaster you could imagine for a family. Why? From the perspective of... They don't like each other. In fact, they hate each other, and one kills the other. Now what Why is this so hard on parents?
They love them both.
Love them both.
And who are they going to blame?
Who are they going to blame? So, and so then in chapter 4, the little bitter seeds of rebellion in chapter 3 are full-blown into murder in chapter 4. In chapter 5, you have cities and technology, and everything just keeps going. And humanity, the violence that is in chapter 4, just grows into chapter 5. And you have this picture of bloodshed. And God looks down from heaven on this world and says, what?
Sorry I made it.
Sorry I made it. I can't stand watching. You know, it's in a sense a parent watching their children destroy each other. And you know, any parent would look at this and say, I want my children to love each other. I want my children to flourish. And they're destroying each other. They're literally killing each other. And he decides he's going to put an end to it by, how's he going to stop it? Flood. Now we're going to go back to beginning of Genesis 1, tohu vavohu, watery chaos, except he doesn't go all the way back to Genesis 1, does he?
No.
He says, I'm going to take the best man and his family, I'm going to save the cream of the crop for the animals, and I'm going to save them, and I'm going to drown the rest, I'm going to start all over. That's what he does. So Genesis 10, he starts all over, but this family discord, so Noah gets out of the ark, and he's a man of the ground, and so he plants a vineyard. And again, remember Isaiah 5, vineyards are supposed to be emblems of glory. Well, he plants a vineyard, and what does he do with the wine that he makes? Drinks too much. And he passed out naked in the tent. One of his sons comes in, laughs at him. He wakes up, curses his son. So here we've got the family discord all over again. And then that then culminates in, now again, pay attention to mountains. That culminates in, well, if you were in the ancient Near East, you would see these, well, you could see them in Mesoamerica too. I mean, what are these things that they build in the ancient world? Ziggurats. They're kind of like pyramids, but with steps. And, well, if you just look at something like this, now you're looking at the plain of you know, the Tigris and Euphrates, the Fertile Crescent. What in a sense have they built? They built a man-made mountain. Well, why do they want a mountain? Why do we build skyscrapers? To get higher. Well, why do we like getting higher?
More important.
More important. We like to look down on others. We like to see the lay of the land. They build an artificial mountain. And so, you know, the Tower of Babel. Well, why do they want to build a tower to the heavens? So they can be like God. So they can unseat God. So they can rule over the earth. And God says,
Sorry.
no. No. You guys think? Now here's an ironic thing. Rebellion in chapter 3 leads to discord in chapter 4. New start in chapter 6 through 9. More family discord in chapter 10. Now God looks at them, and their cooperation is in fact rebellious. They can't agree, they can't get along with each other except if they're motivated by selfish ambition. And so God says, you like discord? Let's just flip a little switch here and confuse the languages and see how well you do. No, they don't do well at all. So that's chapter 11. Then at the end of chapter 11, God starts a whole new approach to things. He says, I'm gonna start again. Well, first of all, before we get there, what's God's goal? What does God want to do?
Reconcile man.
Cleanse the wickedness.
Cleanse the wickedness, reconcile with humanity, reconcile heaven and earth. Again, the story of the Bible is not the story about heaven and hell. Hell is very real. Hell winds up, in a sense, being outside the story completely. In other words, when you get to the end of the story, there are still people who say, I don't want to have anything to do with God. God says, okay, you can go here, but I will no longer let you muck this up anymore. That's, in a sense, the end of the story. Book of Revelation. Okay? So hell is finally the place where people who are determined to, they don't want God, they want their own way, and God says, okay, you and everyone else that wants that, you can all be there. But you're out of heaven and earth, because I'm no longer going to allow the earth to have this rebellion, so you can go rebel all you want here. That's, in a sense, what hell is. So, but the story of the Bible is the story of heaven and earth. And so God has now a new plan in order to redeem heaven and earth, to get rid of the rebellion. There's lots of ways to talk about this, okay? And the new plan involves, well, I'm going to start with someone again. Who's he going to start with? Abraham. And he says to Abraham and Sarah, who haven't had any children, haven't been able to have any children, I'm going to make you a great nation. Which, again, is the most crazy, ironic thing you could imagine. Why?
They don't have their children.
They're old. They're too old to have children. And so that's the story that begins. And then you have Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Joseph, Egypt. And then they go into Egypt and they multiply, and he rescues them from Egypt. But the heart of the story is now Israel. And what is God's mission for Israel? To be an example. To show his glory. And then the nations will come to Israel because they will recognize what in this tiny little example should be the reclamation of the kingdom of God. Okay? That's the story. And then in the desert already, they have a tabernacle, and when they come to Jerusalem, and David establishes Jerusalem, this all takes a long time. They build a temple here in Jerusalem, and what's the relationship between the temple in Jerusalem and the temple up here? Right. Temples are where God's reigned from. They're there. So God is reigning over the earth from Jerusalem. That's the vision. And remember last week we talked about the navel of the earth, the umbilical cord. This is, in a sense, the umbilical cord between heaven and earth. It's right there in Jerusalem. But now the Babylonians, they had their own navel of the earth, right? That was Babylon. And, well, Marduk. Marduk was the god. And Babylon was his temple. And then you had Ishtar, you had all the other gods. Okay. So, well, Israel thinks it's the center of the world. Babylon says it's the center of the world. How can you tell who's really the center? Who's got the most power? Exactly. Well, who's got more power? Babylon or Israel? Babylon. So Babylon comes, deports some people from Israel, cleans out the gold from the temple, And then Israel gets a little rambunctious and rebellious again, and Babylon's like, you need a reminder. You need a reminder of who's in charge. So we're going to come down, and then 586 BC, they come down, and now we're going to really make our point. So what building do they destroy? The temple. All right. Now, what's the point of destroying the temple?
Our God is stronger than yours.
Yeah, your God is gone.
Yeah, your God is gone. Now, for a while, we let you have your little God, because our God was up here on the hierarchy, and yeah, there's other little gods. We will, if we're feeling magnanimous and generous, we'll let you have your little gods. But you haven't been a good boy, so we're going to come and take your gods from you. So you destroy the temple. Now, this is the common culture of the day, okay? Everybody understands this language. Now, what should happen if Israel follows the rules? So, exiles get taken from Jerusalem to Babylon. What should happen?
Part of the Babylonian culture and worship Margaret.
Exactly. Become part of the Babylonian culture, worship Margaret. Daniel gets taken into Babylon as a young man, bright and full of promise. Why? What's Babylon's interest in Daniel? That's right. He's smart. Babylon can use a nice, bright young man like you. So he gets taken to Babylon, and first thing he does when he gets to Babylon is Babylon gives him a what? An education. We're going to teach you how to be a good Babylonian. And since you're fluent in your mother tongue, and we'll teach you our tongue, and we'll teach you our ways, you will now bring our wisdom back to your country and run you're going to be basically a tool of Babylon and Marduk. So what's the story of Daniel about when we went through the story of Daniel?
He doesn't succumb.
He doesn't succumb. And what we've seen now with Daniel and Ezekiel is that they're not following the script. So the book of Ezekiel opens with this really strange scene. Ezekiel's been brought out to Babylon, and now Ezekiel, he was a priest in Jerusalem. He should now, he doesn't have very much status, but he should be recognizing that Marduk is king. Okay? But he's outside by the irrigation canal, and he looks up in the sky, and what does he see? Way back at the beginning of the book. At this point yet, the temple isn't destroyed. He sees God on his throne, and his throne has wheels, and it has seraphim. And Ezekiel's like, what are you doing here? Because what was Ezekiel's cultural assumption about where God should be?
Jerusalem.
Should be in Jerusalem. That's the navel of the world. You should be in Jerusalem. And he's got some dissonance about what's going on there. And God is basically saying, I'm leaving Jerusalem. And Ezekiel's like, why are you leaving? Well, why is God leaving Jerusalem?
Jerusalem left them.
That's right. Go ahead, Barbara.
I was going to say same because you said that.
Yeah, Jerusalem has abandoned the calling, has abandoned the mission. And God is saying, I'm not going to let my reputation be destroyed by these people. So I'm out of here. That bothers Ezekiel. And then for a lot of the book, the story starts, this again is common in the prophets. God is angry with them. And we have all of the details, all the ways that Israel has broken the covenant. Okay? He's broken the covenant. Now, the covenant is an administration of a relationship. And the covenant is supposed to help them. Well, think about, let's say you have a teenage child in your house, and you're trying to train that child, and so you have rules for that child. Are the rules the relationship? What's the relationship between relationship and rules? Why do you sit down and make rules with a child?
Because you love them.
Because you love them. And you say, if we're going to share a house, these are the rules. Wipe your feet when you come in the door. Wash your hands before you sit down and eat. Now, what are all these rules for? That's right. And sometimes the child will notice the parent breaking one of the rules that the parent set. That child is on that parent like this, right? Like, hey, wait a minute. Well, that child is on to something about rules, right? What's the child recognize about rules? Well, you don't always follow them.
They're important.
But they're important. And even the parent, if the parent's going to bring the child to these rules, the parent also has to live by these rules. What does that teach the child? Something really important.
Rules can be broken.
Well, rules can be broken, and sometimes, at some point in the child's development, they'll learn that too. You don't always have to go by rules, but what are rules for?
For the welfare of each person.
Okay. And all of us should, in some ways, follow the rules. Now, we're doing this right now, and we've been so thoroughly acculturated to it, none of us even are aware of the rules we're following. One person talks at a time. Someone talks, we listen. I mean, these are all little rules, and we don't even have to talk about the rules because we practice them. Sometimes if someone is having trouble with it, we will pull out a rule or write a rule or enforce a rule, and that then brings order again to the situation. All right? So God sends the prophets to Israel and says, you've been breaking the rules, and this is threatening our relationship. And if you continue to break the rules, our relationship may end. Now, think about a marriage. So, one of the rules in a marriage, pretty big rule, don't have sex with other people. Okay? Someone starts breaking the rules. The other person says, I have a right to end this now because you broke the rule. But let's talk about this because there's some important things here, and I don't want to just throw this away. The relationship is really important. Even though you've broken a rule, we're going to work on this. But then the other person breaks the rule again. Or the other person says, you're not the boss of me. Or the other person says, well, I feel justified in breaking this rule because of some of the things that you did. Right? This is how it goes, right? And then the relationship collapses. And then, well, now everybody's into chaos, into different realms, okay? And then everybody's looking to establish new rules and new order and so on and so forth. Well, God, in a sense, says, I'm done. Now, this is really important for Ezekiel and Daniel because according to the rules, the common rules in the rest of the world, Ezekiel and Daniel should abandon the Lord and follow Marduk and become Babylonian. At least until the Greeks come. Or the Persians come. And then the Greeks. And then the Romans. Because I'm always finding a new, bigger God. Oh, okay. Or there's always a new big dog. Oh, okay. But these prophets and these people of Israel are stubborn and they're saying, I don't think it's just one God after another. I think there really is one God, and I think that God is working out his relationship with the world. So you know what? Even though Babylon won, I'm sticking with this God. And I'm going to understand the story in a very different way. So Israel broke the rules. And so most of the prophetic books are, you broke the rules. You're threatening the relationship. Okay. Then comes the day of the Lord. What's the day of the Lord? We found this again and again and again in the prophetic books, haven't we? Why is it called that? In a marriage relationship, what would be the day of the Lord? Standing before a judge.
The final divorce.
The final divorce. So the judge says, bang, your divorce is done. Well, let's talk about how divorced people feel about that day. Well, it's complicated, right? Some people, when their divorce is finally final, what do they do? Sometimes they get back together. That's right.
There's relief.
There's relief because, sometimes there's anger. Sadness. Loss. Sometimes there's celebration. Sometimes feeling like a failure. It's all those things. That's, in a sense, the day of the Lord. Because the day of the Lord comes and God says, enough! I'm sending my armies. Your temple is gone. The armies of Babylon leave, and there's just a burning pile of stone. And this entire project, well, a marriage is a tiny little universe, isn't it? It's a reconciliation, not necessarily between heaven and earth, but it kind of is. Because when you listen to romantic songs on the radio. Your heaven. Isn't that what people find in romance? Don't they find heaven? At least initially.
On earth.
On earth. You hear it in the songs all the time, don't you? You're heaven on earth. You're an angel. We keep using that language, don't we? Marriages are like this story. Well, the day of the Lord is like, done. You want to be single? There you go. Have at it. How's singleness for you? Suddenly it's like, well, at least in a marriage, I had some orientation. I knew where the things might not have been good, but at least I knew the lay of the land. Now singleness, what does that mean?
Starting over.
Sleep with anyone you want. Is that a good thing? You tell me. It's like, yeah, sleep with anyone I want. Get used by people. Get rejected by people. You have this up and down roller coaster of chaos with people. Oh, I can sleep with anyone I want. The kids somehow don't like it that I've had 4 different boyfriends in the last 2 years. And they're starting to give me grief because of it. And they're not doing well in school. And suddenly, freedom and chaos start looking a lot alike. So, well, notice the pattern of the prophetic books. They usually begin with a marriage in crisis. And the prophets come and speak from the Lord and says, God isn't happy with our union. God has some complaints because we began this relationship. Well, where did they begin the relationship in the Bible? Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. At Sinai. It's where they set down the rules. And what did Israel say?
We'll obey.
We'll obey. But, here's the thing about Israel. Israel isn't a lot different from a lot of times. Sometimes people talk, I'm pastors, people, and now with all this YouTube stuff, I got people bringing me all their stuff from all over the world. But you want to know something? The details can be different or interesting, but just like you said, Barbara, the patterns are the same. well, I got this woman, and I'm in a relationship with her, and, I really like her a lot, but we fight all the time, and now she wants to get married, or we want to have a kid, and I'm kind of thinking that, maybe if we have a kid, well, that'll really cement our relationship, and, Edie hears this stuff all the time. Right?
You refer to him as somebody else.
Different names, different variables, same old stories. And so this is what's happening, already when you begin on Sinai. A marriage counselor would sit back and say, well, Lord, Israel as a wife, she's a bad bet. Things are already really bad, and you're just in the engagement period. And the Lord says, I know she's a project. I'm going to stick with her. And again, if you go back in the book of Ezekiel, you find all of these metaphors get picked up and played out in the story. And, well, the day of the Lord comes and the divorce is final. But then almost all the prophet books, after the day of the Lord, have this new period. And what happens, Barbara, you said it already. What happens after the divorce? What does the Lord begin to say? Because now let's talk about, we have these laws in the United States, and they're good laws. And what I'm about to say is not in any way judgment upon the fact that, so two people live together in the state of California, and then they live together for 4 or 5 years, and then they separate. What claim does if the partner, you've got one partner who earns a lot of money and one partner who doesn't have a lot of skills. This is usually the man and the woman. Not always. What happens if they just live together in the state of California?
Shouldn't have any claim on each other.
Exactly. You have no claim on each other. People say, well, it's just a piece of paper. Yeah. So is the deed to your house. That's right. Try getting rid of that piece of paper. That piece of paper, according to the law, that piece of paper means something. In the state of California, these two part ways. She doesn't have anything to stand on. Well,
Because he doesn't.
that's not necessary.
okay, I'm oversimplifying.
Okay.
Let's say they're married. What happens?
You know what I was going to say? That in California was the case until the actor, what was his name? That his girlfriend took him to court for palimony.
Oh, really? Did she win something?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, well, then I'm wrong. I thought that was the way in California, so I'm married, so I'm under the other regulation. So in California, if you're married and you split up, what has to happen? You split it up. The money gets split up. Okay. Now, ancient world, usually a woman, remember in the middle of the book of Ezekiel, you have the story about, the king who finds this girl baby kicking in the reek. Yeah, that's the whole story right there. We've told the story again and again and again and again and again in the book of Ezekiel. Well, so now it's after the day of the Lord, and the divorce is final. And what does God begin to say?
Still love her.
I still love her. I still love her. And what am I going to do? What am I going to do for her? I'm going to bring her back. And this is the last few chapters that we've been reading in the book of Ezekiel. It's all this stuff. I'm going to bring her back. And this time it's going to be different. Right? This time it's going to be different. This time, well, how's it going to be different? Every time, we've seen it ourselves. People get divorced. They hated, they got married, they were in love, everything was stormy, they get divorced. After the divorce, maybe they've been through a couple other relationships, and then what do?
Get back together.
Get back together. And they say, it's going to be different this time. And often it is. Because they learned something. And they thought, yeah, I'd like to go running around, but, boy, it really wasn't worth it, was it? And so you get to this point in the book of Ezekiel, and, well, now suddenly we have these visions, and I'm going to bring Israel back to her mountain. Okay? And she's going to be my bride. And we're going to have a good marriage. And we're going to have kids. And the vision that we had initially for our life together is going to be the vision we realize here. Okay, jump into chapter 40. In the 25th day of our exile, at the beginning of the year, in the 10th month, on the 14th day, after the fall of the city, on that very day. Now, Ezekiel likes to play around with the chronologies. And basically, well, let me see, that's right. Ezekiel's exile, 597 BC. That's when Ezekiel went into exile. Temple is destroyed in 586 BC. Now, at this point, it's 14 years after the destruction of the temple. So, see if I put down the date. 573. Playing around with the months. So this is the date of the vision. Now this is 14 years after the destruction of the temple, but it's 25 years after the beginning of his exile. Now, again, the Hebrews love to play with numbers. 50 is a really important number for the Hebrews. Why?
Year of Jubilee.
Year of Jubilee. What's the relationship between 25 and 50? In a sense, now literally this doesn't work, because if you look at the chronology, they got a while before the second temple is founded. But symbolically, basically the vision here is saying we're halfway through our period of separation. Now, what is the year of Jubilee? Well, where does it come from, the year of Jubilee? And what was it about?
Wasn't it they lost their property?
It was about land. That's right. It was about land. So Israel goes into the promised land, and everybody gets their inheritance. And what their inheritance is this little plot of land. And it said, let's say the Menandel family. Okay, so the Menandel family gets their inheritance. And the Bean family gets their inheritance. And the Meeks get their inheritance. And the Roos family gets their inheritance. Well, what's that about? Oh, got to give Carmen her inheritance too. I won't leave Carmen out. Well, each of us, basically the idea is everybody gets a plot, and you work this plot, because land is life. And you can farm here, and you can eat off the ground, and you can sell the excess. And, well, but things don't always go well for everyone. And in the course of time, well, Maury was too busy growing fruit trees, and everybody else grew fruit trees, so the fruit market wasn't very good. And Carmen planted beans, and hardly anybody planted beans, and so Carmen got good money for her beans, and so poor Maury went bankrupt, and then Maury started to go hungry, and Carmen says, hey, Maury, I'll help you out. I'm going to buy your land, and I'll give you the money, but I'm going to farm both land. I'm going to double my bean sales. And so Carmen gets really rich, and Maury kind of ekes out a living, But you get to the year of Jubilee, and what happens?
He gets his land back.
Maury gets his land back. Carmen's like, oh, okay, had a good run, but Mark will have to work the beans on our own land here. That's kind of the idea, that the year of Jubilee. Now, for Maury's been waiting to get his land back. And, he made some bad business decisions. Not everybody really wanted those weird things Maury grows in his backyard. And his jujus and his, I don't know, all the things that Maury grows. But he says, I made some business decisions. They didn't turn out right. Carmen did better, because Carmen bought me out. We were able to eat through and survive. But then, Paul, Maury's son, says, okay, now it's my shot to see if I can do better. And that way it's, the people, you can fall, but you don't fall too far. Year of Jubilee comes and you get a fresh start. That's powerful. Well, in a sense, what happens here is that this whole story is about God saying, you know what? Israel, you messed up. And you didn't do well. But guess what? Year of Jubilee is coming and you're going to get a second chance. And everybody's like, that sounds good. I get a fresh start. So, that's what's with the numbers. The vision of the Lord took me to the land of Israel and set me on a very high mountain. Here we go again. Let's deal with these mountains.
Where God is.
That's where God is. This is set me on it. Now notice the mountain isn't named. And that's important. Why? Yeah, well, the point here isn't, I'm taking you to this place. The point here is, it's a very high mountain. So, now, we're back in here, and we have a very high mountain, on whose south side were some buildings that looked like a city. There's a city on this mountain. And he took me there, and I saw a man whose appearance was like bronze. He was standing at the gateway with a linen cord and a measuring rod. Well, this man whose appearance is like bronze, if you do a little concordance search in the Bible, you'll discover that this bronze man pops into the story fairly frequently. You can find him at the beginning of the book of Ezekiel, where God shows up in his throne. You can also find him in the book of Revelation. Then this measuring rod. So then I made this, if you look on the back here, this little diagram. Here you have, this is from one of the surrounding cultures. You have a god holding out a measuring rope and a rod. Now this linen rope is like a tape measure, and the rod is like a yardstick. And this is a common cultural motif where, well, way back in 1963, when the huddled congregations of North Jersey wanted to build a mission on Jefferson Street in Patterson, they broke ground. I'm just saying groundbreaking, and they took a picture. Any guess what they took a picture of when they broke ground?
Men with shovels.
Men with shovels. Exactly right. Now, how would you know that, Marty?
They still live today? I have no clue.
This is a motif. This is how we do things. You break ground. Well, what is it? Now, does it matter where everyone stands with their shovel and they're all, does the architect come and say, no, don't dig there, dig over there? No, that doesn't make any difference.
No, it's a symbol.
It's a symbol. It's a symbol. And the symbol is, here together we're going to have a new start. We're going to build something new. We're at the beginning of a bright new future. That's what the measuring rod and the measuring cord are all about. And so, It's a high mountain. And there's a city. And there's a measuring rod. Son of man, look carefully and listen closely and pay attention to everything I'm going to show you. For that is why I have been brought here. Tell the people of Israel everything you see. Okay. See which one I reserve. Well, remember, the prophetic story begins, you've broken the rules. The day of the Lord comes in. The divorce is final. What phase are we in now?
Last days.
Last days. Perfect. Because now, see, we didn't get done today, so we'll get into it next week. But if, Lily wants to go home with her study Bible and start doing research, chapters 40 through 48 in the book of Ezekiel are sometimes called Ezekiel's Torah. Ezekiel's Torah.
What's that?
Why would this be Ezekiel's Torah? What's happening here?
Back to God's laws.
Back to God's laws.
A new start.
A new start. Now, so what happens in the story of Israel is that the prophets come, the divorce is the exile,